Thanks so much for letting us host this fabulous screening. Congratulations to all of you on a terrific documentary. Jon, I think this is your 5th documentary, is that right?
Oh,
well, okay, we don't need to go. Anyway, you've made some documentary before now. And I thought it was quite interesting. So a couple of them, so Elstree 76 and your earlier film about music, and also Hollywood Bulldogs, your fabulous documentary about Hollywood stuntmen, British stuntmen, which we'll be showing here, I gather, during the
we just found that out.
The action season, which is coming up after the festival. So look out for that if you haven't seen it. So those were films about sort of people behind the masks, behind the scenes in a way, but you took a very different approach now, choosing a big star.
Yeah.
Why Christopher Lee?
I mean, there's a couple of reasons for that. I can tell you the inspiration as to why I wanted to make a film about Christopher Lee, and Hank can tell you the commercial imperative as to why we made a film about Christopher Lee.
Yeah, it sort of happened at the same time. We'd just made Real Britannia, which is a 4-part series about the modern history of British cinema, which is on ITVX now. ITVX? Not seeing anyone writing this down. ITVX. We'd done that, and we were completely exhausted, and we were trying to figure out what to do next. And actually, Abacus, the sales agent, who I have a great relationship with, had just had a couple of great successes with the Richard Harris film, Peter O'Toole, and I think Joan Collins, and they just said, do you have a British icon that you would like to make a film about, So I just said that to Jon, and it kind of coincided with your inspiration.
I had Real Britannia was a very big undertaking for us, and when it finished, Hank sodded off to the Caribbean, and
it's not true.
I took to the sofa, and I went down kind of a rabbit hole on YouTube of just watching old episodes of This Is Your Life, and I got really into it, really obsessed with it. And the Christopher Lee episode came up, and it was unlike every other episode because he looked like he was going to have a nervous breakdown for half an hour. He was absolutely, you can watch it, it's on YouTube, he looks like a rabbit caught in headlights the whole time. And I watched it a couple of times in a row because it was so weird. It felt so different to every other episode. And it just kind of became obvious that and I read his autobiography as well, which is an amazing book, which is very self-deprecating. I'm sure Jonathan will tell you, it's not what you would expect Christopher Lee to be. And that's what interested me. I think I'd held deeply this notion for years of who Christopher Lee was and what he represented, and I'd seen him in all his films. But then when you actually saw him kind of unguarded and raw, he seemed to be a very nervous person who was very particular and controlling of his narrative, and his insecurities were just kind of laid very bare, and that was what made it interesting. I mean, anyone who knows anything about cinema knows that he led the most amazing life, and you can go online and you can look at a list of, a debunked list by Jonathan of like 100 Christopher Lee facts, and he did, and they're all rooted in truth somewhere, somewhat. And he did live a really fascinating life, and you could make that documentary quite easily. This happened, this happened, this happened. But to me, it was more interesting to kind of look at him as an emotional character and to make a film which was more about kind of insecurities and empathy and human frailty.
So Jonathan, you're the only person on this panel who knew Christopher Lee as the author of his screen biography, screen history, yes. So what was it like working with him on that?
Well, I think one of the great values of this film, and I have to congratulate Hank and Jon, is that I find the film very emotional to watch because you've captured him so well. And as you say, insecurity. It shouldn't be any great revelation that an actor is insecure. I mean, so many actors are, but you don't expect it of Christopher Lee because he was such a monolithic figure. And I think you've sort of dug into that beautifully, but you've also captured his humour, because one of the things that really struck me about him was this enormous sense of humour he had, and that's another thing that you don't necessarily expect of Christopher Lee, because, as you said, he liked to control his own narrative, and that involved controlling his own image. And his image was very monolithic, and very, very rarely did he allow that humour to show. But when you knew him personally, it was omnipresent. He was a very, very funny man, consciously funny, and also, it has to be said, sometimes unconsciously funny, because he did have that very imposing, slightly pompous, perhaps, detractors might say, but a very imposing quality which made some of his more bombastic pronouncements quite amusing.
So much more than a simple trawl through his career, which it does brilliantly, actually, as well. I learned a huge amount about Christopher Lee, which I'm sure many of the audience did as well.
Jo was actually a consultant on this project, so she taught us a lot about Christopher Lee as well.
Well, we all learned a lot about Christopher Lee, let's put it that way. But yeah, I mean, this aspect of trying to convey what he was like as a person just, feels like the much harder thing to do than simply tell the story of someone's life. And I noticed you sort of chose to tell it in his own words, which of course is quite a tricky thing to do, because maybe not everything all the stories he told about himself were quite true, as you alluded to earlier. So how did you try and navigate this sort of the sea of facts?
It's kind of complicated. Documentary is a really complicated form if you care about it. And you're playing about with perceptions of truth, which are really dangerous, and you have an amount of power. And it's a weird thing to undertake, making a film about someone's life, especially someone who I never met. I don't know him. So, it's wrong. I'm not standing here saying it's the truth. And the whole opening of the film, with that weird stuff with the puppet and with Peter getting into character, is my way of telling the audience, I'm making this up. This is a fabrication. This is not the real thing. And there's been some confusion in reviews where people have thought that we adapted the autobiography. But I think there's 2 lines of dialogue from the autobiography and the whole thing, which were just nice turns of phrase.
It was a very carefully written script.
Very carefully written script with your assistant and with Jonathan's
iterations.
assistant.
Yeah, with Jonathan.
But I think that comes across. But I think and your previous documentaries have been almost in your own voice, particularly Real Britannia. But this is someone else's voice, but I think yours is in there too somehow.
It's a fabrication. I mean, I didn't know him.
Yeah.
So, and also, I mean, it's a portrait. And I think if you look at documentary as portraiture, it makes a lot more sense. So this is my portrait of him. I'm deciding what to put in, I'm deciding what to leave out, and I'm making the character. And actually, writing the script was a very long process, and it was difficult. Because if you actually watch an interview with Christopher Lee, he's a very infuriating speaker. He can't answer a question. He's like Donald Trump at times, because you ask him a question and he'll start answering it, and in the first sentence he'll go off on a tangent, and then he'll go off on a tangent of a tangent, and then a tangent, and he'll talk for 20 solid minutes, and then the question won't have been answered.
You should have been a politician.
He would, and he could have been. I mean, you're absolutely right. The way his speech patterns were fascinating.
There's a clip in the film where he's talking to Tony Iommi
Yes.
backstage, and we had a tape of
The actual dialogue.
Yeah, the actual dialogue. And it's just Christopher talking for about 65 minutes, It's just really, Tony's like, yeah.
I tried to put it in the script. I tried to emulate his kind of vocal patterns, and it wasn't possible. So I had to say, okay, I'm going to create this character of Christopher Lee, which speaks with the voice that we expect him to speak with, having seen him in films, but is also informed by his autobiography and by the huge amount. I mean, the day we spent at Special Collections with you, I walked to Joe, gave me a pile of papers that big, which were all interviews with Christopher Lee. So I spent a long time watching interviews and reading interviews to the point where I had his voice in my head, and I felt like I was able to synthesize a character. And I felt comfortable doing that because I knew that all of the talking heads would contradict it. Gently, in a nice way. He would present, and everything he says on screen is definitely his version of events from his books. Like, it's definitely his thing. And in fact, me and Jonathan had some, not run-ins, but I would send Jonathan a draft of the script and he'd say, well, that's not true. He lied about that for decades. and I'd say, but it's his truth. And that's why we ended up putting Jonathan in the film, because I was like, you come on and say, that's not true, and the others did as well, in a very gentle, affectionate way. So you've got kind of a lot of things going on.
And that in itself builds up a picture of the person.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Jonathan, a lot of what you do in the documentary is very important, which is to ground us and give us some historical background, etc. But what was he like? How did you find him? What was your relationship with him like?
What was he like? He was a delightful man, I have to say. And going to visit him at Cadogan Square, you never know. You were always aware of his childlike enthusiasm. One day you might be shown his complete set of Ian Fleming first editions, or you might be shown another day his Special Forces insignia. He had a huge collection of those. Or he'd fling open the wardrobes and get out costumes from Sherlock Holmes, in fact, the German Sherlock Holmes films, and other ones. And he was bursting with this kind of childlike enthusiasm. And he was just extraordinarily funny to be with. And you became aware of some of his strange obsessions. I mean, Paul Maslansky in the film mentioned that he didn't like Michael Caine. That jealousy thing, well, I can tell you, he didn't like Sean Connery either. He was spitting blood when Sean Connery accepted a knighthood. Several years before he got one. But he was extraordinarily funny. And as I say, he was quite often unconsciously funny. There was one occasion when Marcus Earn, my publisher, who's lurking on row F, he was with me there, and we were talking about the first Hammer Dracula and what a success it was and the fact that it made him. And he was very proud of this fact. And so he said, it was a global success. And I do mean the world. That was a classic moment of unconscious humour, and I was grateful to him for clarifying the meaning of global. but that was a small example of what you mentioned, John, the fact that he was the absolute uncrowned prince of the subclause, and you couldn't keep him on track. And as a matter of fact, bless him, but you may wonder, why did you never see him on Parkinson or any of the big chat shows? That's why, because he just talked and talked and talked. He was not good at sound bites, but he was a delightful and humorous man. And I think one of the great values of this film is, of course, that there he is, and he's a marionette amongst other things, but that's him.
Hank, you've got some great talking heads in the film. Was there anybody you couldn't get?
Hey, oh God, be careful.
Yes and no. It's such a complex thing because you basically have a list and you throw out requests to people, and the BFI helped a little bit with this. Some people you approach their agent, some you have another route, and there were a couple of people who agreed to do it very early on, and kept agreeing to do it for about a year. And
one of them is still agreeing to do
it.
He
told me a week ago. He told me a week ago he's not going to do it.
Oh, really? Hank's like, at what point do I tell him that the film's finished? I'm like, Blu-ray.
No, that's what I thought. I thought I can just recut it and sell it to America again.
So you said no,
or just put it in the Blu-ray.
It took him 2 years.
Yeah, so there was a few people. We were disappointed not to get Tim Burton, I think. It would have been nice. But in a way that I found, we've made a lot of films together where we've wanted to capture certain people to do interviews, and we haven't got some, and we've got others we didn't expect to get. And in a way, it always seemed, the choice of interviewees always seems to fall into a sort of a nice, it's partly because John always makes the best of what he's given. But I think particularly, I noticed watching a bit tonight, I really like Juan Aneros. Yeah. He's just so nice, and he was great, and he just really loved Christopher. He really loved him, and he was just a sort of gift from heaven, even though he wasn't related by blood to Christopher. He just felt like a really, and I love Harriet. She's fantastic, and so I think that there was lots of people I tried to get and couldn't. There was lots of people I tried to get and did, and then there was some weird ones that fell in between. So, and it's always that way when you're making documentary, especially when you're working with a low budget and you haven't got Ron Howard as an executive producer or whatever, which is fine. We don't need him. So it always seems to fall in a way, doesn't it, in a natural way.
It always does. Yeah. And I think you can't miss what you don't have.
Exactly.
It's kind of like, and also sometimes you score these big interviews and they're lousy. So
I'll tell you who else was absolutely loves Christopher and loved to do an interview was Johnny Depp. Then he didn't have time and various things happened. So because Christopher was really loved by a lot of people, so they're all pretty positive. Did that answer your question? I
It
went
did.
on a bit there.
Yeah, he didn't name, there's many names, but that's fine. So one of the most charming things, obviously, about the documentary is the animation and the use of the marionette. How did you arrive at that decision?
The first kind of creative impulse, I knew that I wanted him to tell his own story, definitely. It was always going to be in his own words. And the first thing that I wanted to do was, I don't know if you'd remember this, it's a bit weird, you can see it on YouTube, about 20 years ago, Bob Monkhouse made a TV advert 4 years after he'd died. And it was a very early use of CG, and it was him coming back from the dead to talk about prostate cancer, which had killed him. And at the time, I was really struck by what a great advert it was, and they used a combination of things. They used digital effects, they used an impersonator, they used standards. It's really well, even looking on YouTube now, it's a really well edited, really cleverly put together piece. So that was the first thing that I thought, and we kind of set out thinking that we actually found some great footage of him from a Polish TV series, which was like Alfred Hitchcock Presents, where he topped and tailed each episode. But he was kind of sat in still chairs, and we thought we could probably get his mouth manipulated and stuff. And we hired a guy to do some tests, and they weren't great. They were early, but they weren't great. But then at that exact moment, that whole deep fake thing happened, and there was some questions about it, and I was moving away from the idea.
It felt really queasy.
It felt wrong. It felt like you were trying to make it look real, which was not something I wanted to do in that way. And then John Landis lost his shit at me. I just mentioned it. I was just like, it looks like we're playing around with this, doing some tests. How dare you? Do you know how disrespectful that would be? 'Cause that's what he's like. You never know quite where you're going to get.
He's crazy, man.
He is crazy. He's wonderful, but he's
First
crazy.
time I talked to him, he was like, Hank, what about that Boris Johnson? I'm like, I don't know, he's a clown. What? He talked about Boris Johnson for 25 minutes. You know?
He's turned into my crazy uncle. He sends me very inappropriate emails that you get very, I shouldn't be sending this to people.
Anyway,
so Landis was kind of the last nail in the coffin. And me and Hank we've just got a really good, creative relationship.
We do.
Where he's the first person I'll talk to about anything creative. And usually, to some degree, the last before we start things getting rolling. And we always have these great car journeys where we just have great conversations and it just evolves. So we kind of said, okay, we're not going to do that. What can we do? No idea is a bad idea. What's possible? And Hank was one who came up with puppetry. And the first person he found was this amazing kind of paper animator who did these incredible live action paper animations.
Chloe found him, actually.
Did Chloe find him?
Yeah, she did.
Never told me that.
That's right.
And that kind of fell to the wayside. And then Hank said, what about marionettes? And instantly it was just
visually it seemed good.
And then he found Andy, or did Chloe find him?
No. No, I was aware of Arch Model Studios, and I remember the first conversation I had with Andy, who's the loveliest man.
Who is here today, by the way.
Gent,
and he's
I think.
fantastic.
Andy Gent and his team are here, and they did the puppet, and I think
right. Yeah, they're a great team and just really lovely people. And I remember the first conversation I had when I was wandering around my living room, and we just started talking about Christopher Lee, and we talked about that, and we talked about Frankenweenie, and they did Isle of Dogs, and it was just really fantastic, and they were so helpful and didn't charge too much, and it's just and also the whole process of getting the puppet made is just really great fun, because you see these lovely beautiful drawings, and then you get these little packages in the post that have a little tiny swatch of houndstooth cloth and some hair, like someone's kidnapped your child. It wasn't that, but yeah, and the place itself is incredible. You go in and there's all the dogs,
magical.
and the Isle of Dogs, and the moment that they close the door and the staff leave at 12 o'clock, all the puppets come to life. So I don't know if you knew that, but
Andy gave my 5-year-old daughter a tour of the whole studio.
It's a beautiful place.
I just saw in her eyes that that's something she's going to remember for her whole life.
Yeah.
And everyone who works for Andy loves what they're doing, and the whole team, watching them work on a puppet, and then watching them operate and kind of service it as it was going along. It's just like they loved it probably more than we loved it. It was amazing.
And we've never done anything like that before.
Ever.
So it was really fun.
I mean, we didn't even know that we needed. I mean, this is how stupid we are. We didn't really understand that we'd need professional puppeteers. Andy was like, I know people, and they were stunning. I mean, that thing terrifies me because the second I touch it, it becomes a mess of knots, expensive knots.
Don't touch it.
I don't touch it. That's the whole point. But you know, those puppeteers, they work together and just produce the most beautiful things. I mean, the shot in the film where you see him dancing, you know, that was kind of improvised. I kind of said, oh, you know what, this would be fun. And in 5 minutes, they had it completely down. And then Ollie, the master puppeteer, he said, oh, I've got an idea. And he just closed the puppet's eyes. And it just added like such a kind of depth to it. So they're amazing.
And all the animation as well. I mean, how many different animators worked on?
I could count them.
Roughly.
Quite a lot.
A lot.
Yeah, and they're
I think some
fantastic.
are here
And
tonight.
We've got some of them here
Yeah,
tonight as
Astrid
well,
Goldsmith,
amazing.
who did a couple, and she's fabulous. She's really fabulous.
I just think it's such a clever way of recounting events in his life that you can't possibly do in any
and
other
the Dave
way.
McKean one, that was a real coup to get
Oh
even,
my God.
you know, I mean, that's beautiful, the whole Lord of the Rings thing when he's in hospital. I love that. I just think that's a little short film. I think Dave's here, but really beautiful. Really beautiful.
That was when we were so lucky to get Dave. I'd communicated with Dave in the past, and he'd mentioned, you know, if you ever have a project come up that you think I'd like, just let me know. So we got in touch, and he kind of said, well, I'm really busy, so but I want to, so I might be able to do a little bit. And in the end, he took the biggest section, and he ended up doing a studio shoot with it, and he composed all the music, and he sent us at one point, we're very kind of hands off with the animators. We gave them the script, and we gave them the dialogue, and we gave them, if they wanted guidance, I'd give them a bit of guidance. And if I had kind of a vision for style, I might say it. But generally, we consulted with showreels just to see, well, they're great, so let's give them a kind of thing. And Dave went off and did it, and at one point he sent us an animatic, just, you know, kind of a rough sketch of it, and we were just like, we could just put the animatic in the
Yeah, I
film.
thought it was finished.
It's like,
No,
this
it's
is really
great.
incredible.
This is great. He's like, no, I haven't finished yet.
And then, of course, adding the voice, choosing Peter.
Oh yeah, and by the way,
Serafinowicz.
Peter called me at 2:45 and said, "Hey, Hank, man, I think there's a screening tonight that I'm coming to, but I can't make it." So he said, "Tell everyone." I said, "Sorry." So Peter Serafinowicz says sorry.
But he does a great job.
He does, and
with
he's
the
lovely
voice. He
guy.
doesn't
Yeah.
overdo it. I think. I think Jonathan, you approved of his
Oh yeah, well,
approach.
again, it's a part of that discursive quality he had. I think if you did I think if you did all that
Yeah.
for 95 minutes, it would concuss the audience. I think Peter just got it absolutely right. Did just enough, and it was very convincing to Christopher Lee. Any more convincing, and as I say, it would have become too much.
People don't realise that impersonations have such a heavy dose of satire and over-exaggeration in them that it's too much. It's way too exaggerated. So we had to kind of work to find the voice. But Peter's amazing, and he's got a very deep voice. He's got that kind of sonorous thing going on anyway, and he's such a great impersonator that it was, you know, we knew that we'd get it. But it was great. It was really.
Was he a Lee? Is he a Lee fan?
Yes, he
think so.
was, I think. Yes, it's hard to tell what
He's
he thinks about
he's
anything.
kind of a fan of everything, isn't
Yeah,
he?
he's
Right.
kind of, he just,
Hard to
I
pin.
think, no, he was.
He's a very relaxed man.
Yes, he's laid
Yes,
back.
that's
So
the
he kind
impression.
of just goes, great.
Yeah.
Everything's great.
Yeah,
So
great.
he did. He got on a whole thing where we showed him a bit of footage of Dracula Dracula was like in the coffin.
Oh, yeah.
And it said Dracula on the side. And he said that kind of looks like a street
Yeah, he
name,
was
doesn't
like,
it?
imagine if someone went to you live in like Dracula Street.
Hey,
yeah,
I live
man,
in
yeah.
Dracula Street.
Yeah, oh yeah. And he just did this whole thing for ages. He's like, what, you mean like Dracula? Yeah, man, yeah. So yeah,
he's a very
it's
positive
a unique
force.
experience.
Excellent.
I think I watched half of them. I think I got through about 150.
Yeah, there was a point at which you were going totally insane.
Oh God.
I remember.
Yeah. But you know, it's part of it. It's the worst thing that I've ever done was I made a documentary kind of about 10 years ago, and an actor in it said that he had been in Crossroads, and I had to watch a year of Crossroads to find his performances. So after that, I can do this. It's not a problem.
Did you listen to the albums? Did you listen?
I listened to. I love the albums. The albums are completely credible. I feel a little bit bad that I mean, the Heavy Metal Christmas one is very silly, but actually the heavy metal albums, to a lot of metal fans, are quite credible.
Some of the Charlemagne stuff
and
is good, man.
Charlemagne stuff's good. Sadly, we couldn't get the license to a whole bunch of music that he'd record, like Rhapsody and things like that. I think you've got a smile on your face, but I think it's quite credible. I quite like that music. Joe Dante nails it when he says that half of Christopher Lee's films are completely forgettable, and he was in unforgivable crap. I mean, like and when I was watching some of it, I was resentful because it's hard to find this stuff. Like, you know, a lot of this stuff was made by these tiny companies that disappeared years ago. So you're spending like 60, 70 quid on a Japanese import of Starship Bloody Invasions, which we couldn't track down the rights to actually use it in the film, which sucks, because the thing that's amazing about that film, which we don't mention in the documentary, is not only does he wear that stupid costume, which is a full leotard, by the way, but he doesn't talk. They all communicate telepathically. And he does his best. He really does his best. But it is absolute dog crap. And I had to watch these films. I forget the name, but the worst one I saw was a 1970s roller skating musical where he played like a psychiatrist. I don't remember the name of it.
You saw that.
Oh God, yeah, I've got it.
Yeah. Oh. That's a film. It's a film called Rollerboy.
Rollerboy.
Shot in San Francisco, but in fact Italian. And look again. He's very good in it.
He's great in it.
But the film is not recommendable.
I mean, actually, you know, he really did. But the other thing, like John Landis said, is it doesn't matter how bad the film. The second he's on screen, woof, the quality goes right up. The film in Amsterdam, which looks like it's shot on video, and then all of a sudden he's like this failed writer doing a book signing that no one attends, and you have this huge empathy, and you go, wow, this is amazing. Yeah. So the trick is, I did not watch 150 films. I started watching 150 films, then I fast forwarded until Christopher Lee was on screen, and then I watched, and then I stopped. So that's.
But I assume, Jonathan, you watched.
A few things escaped me, but not many. And actually, Joe Dante's gag about he pitied you for having had to see them all. He actually, when he inscribed my book to me, and there was more than one edition, and he repeated the same joke on all editions. He wrote, "Jonathan, you have my gratitude and my sympathy." That was his line. You mean my favourite performance of his, or just favourite all-round film? I'd recommend seeing The Whip and the Body, which is a Mario Bava film from 1963, and we had some intriguing clips from it in there. And that's a classic example of Christopher playing a short part. In fact, he dies halfway through, but of course, he's not dead. And again, that's like Dracula, that's a case of him permeating a film while barely appearing in it. And that was one of his great gifts. And it's also a great, perverse, strange, weird film.
Cheesy. I love The Wicker Man. I got a strange fondness for Dr. Terror's House of Horrors. Is that what it's called? Yeah. I love him in that. I like his spectacles.
I think The Wicker Man is objectively the best film he made. I think it's perfect, and he's amazing in it. Yeah. But my personal favourite, and I'm not.
I think I know what this is.
You know what it is. Because we fought for a long... The Return of Captain Invincible, that clip where he sings in it, that was actually the first Christopher Lee film I saw, which my dad taped for me off TV when I was about 8 years old and said, you might enjoy this.
Do you know who wrote the script, by the way?
I do, but I've forgotten.
Stephen D'Souza.
Stephen D'Souza, that's right.
Yeah.
So
Who
the
wrote
thing,
Die Hard.
the thing about who wrote Die Hard,
Yeah.
it's a really weird film. I mean, it's got Alan Arkin and Christopher Lee, who are brilliant, and it's got songs by Richard O'Brien from Rocky Horror. So it's amazing, and it's shot in a really weird way, and it's not a perfect film, and it just got properly released by Severin on Blu-ray, and they finally put together like the definitive version, and it still makes no sense whatsoever, but it's so lively and it's so beautiful, and it's Alan Arkin and it's Christopher Lee and it's Richard O'Brien, and he's having fun. I mean, he has fun the whole way through that film. He loves it, and the only it wasn't even an argument, but the only sticking point me and Hank had on this whole film is I think we generally kind of respect each other when we say, I want this, and Hank said, I'm so sorry, but I can't. Either you couldn't track down the rights or we couldn't afford it. We couldn't afford it.
Yeah.
And he said, I can't afford to put a clip of it in, because it was music as well, wasn't it? It was kind of, and I just said, I'm really sorry.
I must have it.
But it's happening.
That's fine, you got it.
And I got it. He was amazing.
So many, because the rights holders are it's just such an odd thing, you know. I mean, some people, you know, Lucasfilm were great, trying to think who else. Some people are just so cooperative and don't charge too much money, and, you know, some people you reach out to license their films, I won't mention who, Warner Brothers. And you don't hear back from them at all. They literally do not respond to your request. So there was lots of stuff we wanted to include, and then you've got guys like Studio Canal. I don't know if Massimo's here tonight from Studio Canal, but quite a few of the films were Studio Canal, and including The Wicker Man. And he's just a fantastic guy to work with. You know, he's just incredibly helpful and just really cooperative, and they want you to use their titles. So the reason I say all that is just because we really, a lot of the time, are at the mercy of the people who are licensing us this content. There was lots of stuff that John wanted to use and we either couldn't afford or just didn't even get a response on that.
And you got to understand, like one of the biggest kind of like points of panic was Warner Brothers own a lot of the Hammer archive, and they own Lord of the Rings. And at the point where they can't even be bothered to answer your call, can't even be bothered to answer an email, you go, well, what are we supposed to do? We're making a documentary about Christopher Lee. So we had to find ways around it, you know. So it's upsetting, but...
Warner Brothers, wonderful company, thank you very much.
It's upsetting, but as you say, this is like our 5th project, and we've learned how to roll with the punches, and we don't get upset.
There was a couple of moments where John was just like, Jesus, you know, stuff he really wanted to use and couldn't use. Yeah.
There's especially, I mean, we've got a wonderful editor, Alex, and the problem is in working is you have to put a cut together before you can go out and license all the clips. You have to know exactly what you want to use. So you get a cut that, you know, you're 1,000% happy with, and then it goes out to the studios and you find out we're not getting this, we're not getting this, we're not getting this, and we can't afford this. And you know, but like I say, you just have to roll with the punches and you just have to go. Right.
Jonathan?
There was one piece of news footage that you went out of your way to get.
God.
The last clip.
Yeah. I mean, that's the whole film.
Yeah.
I mean, that I didn't think they would license it to us.
Why not? It was just Getty.
Because it's B-roll, and I think it's kind of embarrassing to whoever actually shot. If it was Sky, but it wasn't Sky, it was BBC.
I can't remember the news. Yeah,
ITV.
News,
Yeah, I was really surprised that you were able to license. So ITN. So.
Okay. Excellent archive producer. Yeah, really good. Thank you very much. Yes.
I was amazed that you were able to, because it's kind of embarrassing.
It's fantastic though. It's just
But the whole film, you know, as soon as I saw it, I was like, well, this is the film,
Yeah.
and this is what we have to get to, and we got it, and it was amazing.
Of course, I think a clip from Jinnah would have been nice, given
Oh,
that
Jinnah.
Christopher Lee was
Don't start Hank on.
No, I wasn't going to delve into the
I
reasons.
visited the director of Jinnah. That was a long day. That was.
Yeah. It's such a shame because, I mean, when you launched your book, Jonathan,
That
When you
geezer
lo-
is not a fan of Christopher Lee.
In fairness, Christopher Lee wasn't a fan of him.
Well, you know, yeah. If I hadn't had to sat in his office for 7 hours.
You both told me to cut that out of the film.
when he was appearing at the Barbican one time, I think it was at the launch of your book, and
Yes.
And the film he chose to show was Jinnah, and I think the horror fans who turned up were quite baffled by.
That's right. Actually, this was the launch of my book about him. It was at the Barbican, and Christopher specially asked for Jinnah to be shown. This was the beginning of 2001, so he'd only made it a few years before, but nevertheless he was already aware that it was kind of rapidly disappearing already, the film, and of course he was so proud of it. And it's and he's fantastic. Again, he's fantastic in it, but the film itself has problems. But yes, I think quite a few horror fans turned up and were a bit baffled to see Muhammad Ali Jinnah, but it was a rare theatrical screening in the UK, so that was valuable in itself.
Yeah, it premiered here at the LFF. I remember seeing it here.
That's right.
NFT1, yeah.
That's a very, very difficult question to answer, actually. I think one moment that was really quintessential Christopher Lee was when I took him the dummy cover of the book, and before publication, obviously, and he was thrilled by the front cover, and then he turned it over and looked at the portrait on the back, and it was a picture of him as himself, but taken for The Devil Rides Out in 1967, and the crooked finger started to wag. And the rumbling began, and I was leaning over the back of his chair, and he was in his chair, and no, we can't have this. No, I don't like this picture, and I asked him why, and he suddenly became rather sheepish, and he eventually admitted that my tie is askew. And he was adamant he couldn't have this picture with his tie askew, and he's so British. So I lied, and I said, as a matter of fact, I've shown this cover to a few people already, and they were all really struck by what an incredible portrait of this is. You're so handsome and so striking, using a bit of actor psychology. And he paused and then said, looked at me and said, "Really?" And then turned back and looked at it with fresh eyes. And that's the picture we use.
There's a really great clip that I found while I was going through the research of him on an Australian kind of talk show, and the guy says to him, "I don't know if you remember this, but I interviewed you a year ago and you talked about your medal collection." And he was like, "Oh, okay." And he's going to give him, he's got a medal for him basically, but he says, "Let's look at the clip." So they show a clip, and it cuts to a year ago, and it cuts back, and Christopher just goes, "I'm wearing the same jacket."
That's right. That's great. That's so sweet. That's very him too.
Right, we need to wrap up now, but very quickly, guys. The film's been seen at quite a few festivals, I gather. Have you got more screenings coming up?
Yeah, it's a screening on Sky as well from the 24th of October.
24th of October
Watch it on the telly,
Sky,
and yeah, great.
And there's going to be a physical media release,
Yeah, next year there will be physical media with lots of extras and all kinds of cool stuff.
And
thanks for coming, everyone.
Is there another project
Yeah, loads of them.
coming? Right, so watch this space.
John's actually written a really fantastic narrative drama about the heydays of Hammer, which is really fantastic, and we're developing that. It'll be our first
Amazing
narrative, first drama to go.
Thanks everyone for coming, and thanks to John, Hank and Jonathan for joining me.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you.